Good afternoon, and thank you everyone for joining us for this, the first of two presentations of the Phase 1 component of the San Diego Public Library Master Plan. My name is Patrick Stewart, CEO of the Library Foundation, and I'm grateful that you have decided to join us this afternoon. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce our presenters, Jill Ayers, Senior Associate from Group 4 Architecture Research and Planning, and Carson Block from Carson Block Technology, both of whom have expertly led the consulting efforts in the development of the plan thus far. And I'd also like to introduce Misty Jones, Library Director for your San Diego Public Library. This afternoon's presentation kicks off this phase of the master plan's public comment and feedback period. In a minute, I'll have Misty introduce the presentation. A brief prepared video from Jill and Carson will be followed by about 45 minutes or so of live Q&A with you all here in attendance. And if you do have questions, please use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your Zoom screen to submit them, and I will facilitate that portion of the presentation. In addition to both today's presentation and our second presentation scheduled for September 18th, I encourage you to go to the library's master plan page on the library website. The link is posted in the chat and in the e-invite that you received prior to today's event to download and read the entire report. On that site, there will be opportunity to enter any feedback or comments that you have, and we will compile each piece of feedback as we prepare this Phase 1 document to make its way to the September 22nd Public Safety and Livable Neighborhoods City Council Committee, and then on to the Library Commission before submission to the City Council. Both the link to the document and to the comment form will be available in the chat. As we continue to identify how best to invest in our library system, an investment in the kind of core library services that make our city so special and makes our communities really thrive, and how we grow that investment, I would like you to know, everyone from the foundation, the friends, and the commission, please know that your participation in this process is vital and gratefully appreciated. And now I'd like to invite Library Director Misty Jones to introduce our presentation. Misty.
Thank you, Patrick, and good afternoon, everyone. As many of you know, the last master plan was developed and adopted in 2002, and libraries have changed quite a bit since that time. Libraries are no longer just warehouses for books, although books are still a vital part of our business. But libraries have grown and are now community centers, workforce training centers, digital hubs, and resource connectors. The last plan did not account for the expanded role of libraries, the exponential growth of our neighborhoods, or for the ever-changing technology. This is why not just an update, but an entirely new plan is so crucial to the future of the San Diego Public Library. As with every plan for the future, the first step is to assess where you currently are, and that is what this document aims to do. There are some general recommendations, but I want to point out that this is not a comprehensive planning document. That will come later. This first document is an assessment of the current state of the library network and provides some guidance for achieving the library's vision and goals. As many of you know, my goal is to be the best library system in the world, and this is the first step to getting us there. The video you are about to see shares the highlights of the report, but I strongly encourage you, just as Patrick said, to take the time to read the document and provide your feedback. A lot of work went into capturing community input, analyzing data, and evaluating services. We really need all of you to dig in and scrutinize the findings and send us your thoughts. We want to fully incorporate your input into the final document. So we're going to show the video now. Just a couple of things. The video may be slightly fuzzy in the beginning, but it will clear up. And the video will also be available on the master plan website, and that link is shared in the chat. And so now here is the video.
Hi, I'm Jill Ayers. I'm with Group 4 Architecture Research and Planning.
And I'm Carson Block with Carson Block Consulting, and we're here to tell you about the San Diego Public Library Master Plan Framework.
Thank you, Carson. We've been working hard on this plan over the past 2 years, and we are super excited to have the opportunity to share it with you. This presentation that we're doing right now is just a quick glimpse at some of the highlights of the plan. We do encourage you to go read the full draft plan document, which has a ton more detail about our findings and insights and recommendations for the future. So we'll have that link to that plan at the end of this presentation. Purpose of this project was to create a plan to guide decision-making about future library improvements in San Diego. It doesn't get into branch-specific recommendations, but it does have a set of principles and strategies and a framework for planning future projects. Process, we took a deep dive into data about the San Diego Public Library and San Diego communities. We looked at what other libraries and communities are doing nationally and around the world. And we looked hard at what San Diegans had to say in this process. In Carson's and my experience in working on other master plans and other communities, this was robust participation that we got here for this project, despite it being mostly remote because of COVID. We had surveys for community members and library staff, open to anyone and everyone who wished to participate. University of San Diego's nonprofit institute ran focus groups for populations that are often underrepresented in plans like this. We had working groups with library staff and with community stakeholders, and presentations to the Library Commission, to the Public Safety and Livable Neighborhoods Committee, and to you. San Diego has a master plan that's been in effect since 2002, and that plan has been very successful. It was adopted with an emphasis on expanding library space to accommodate past and future community growth in San Diego. And it was very successful. You got a beautiful new central library. You've got some beautiful new branches. A couple are still in the works. New San Carlos and Ocean Beach expansion are still being planned. After the last 19 years, you've got 80% more library space now than you did in 2002, and significantly expanded library service in San Diego. However, some areas of San Diego still have more library space than others. More than half of the library's branches weren't improved over the last 19 years. As I said, that plan was focused on expansion. Not a comprehensive look at all the facilities and what they needed. So many of the branches that weren't touched that master plan are in some of San Diego's older and less affluent neighborhoods. They tend to be smaller or very small. Many of them are crowded, and they struggle to meet community needs. And a lot of them have moderate to significant maintenance needs. There was a 2016 study that the city did of all of its facilities. And at that time, 5 years ago, there was already about a $50 million backlog of maintenance needs in just these libraries that weren't touched in the last master plan. So these kinds of deficits definitely affect how the access the community has to library services and to the San Diego Public Library's ability to provide services.
That's right. And space itself is challenged. The library expansion projects over the past 20 years just didn't add enough space to stay ahead of population growth. Over time, needs and priorities for library services, for technology, for collections also grew, and they also diversified. Demand for space in libraries to work, to collaborate, and gather is only growing. Now, looking ahead, San Diego Association of Governments project 20% more population growth over the next 30 years, and that will put even more strain on San Diego's libraries. SDPL is a highly creative and innovative organization, but serving the community also requires resources. SDPL's budget hasn't increased nearly as much as the amount of space it now operates. Now, even with major contributions from community donors and organizations such as the San Diego Public Library Foundation and the Friends of the San Diego Public Library, SDPL's operating budget is still significantly less than the California state average. So what this means is the library's collection is too small to meet community needs, particularly for materials in multiple languages as well as new and popular titles. Library technology is insufficient and outdated, especially in the neighborhoods where it is needed the most. And library staff are stretched thin and don't always have the time, the training, or the tools to meet patron needs. This plan provides a framework for an equitable, resilient, and high-performing network of libraries for San Diego. This framework is specific to the needs of San Diego, and it was informed by library trends and best practices from around the globe. But it also leverages the experience, the strengths, the innovations, and the success of San Diego Public Library's experience serving San Diego communities. It incorporates the ideas and input as well of thousands of San Diegans who have participated in the planning process.
Just a quick look at some of the principles and strategies in the plan. Strategies and principles about place. Every library in the San Diego Public Library system should provide a wow experience for patrons. It should be a place that they want to come back to over and over and over again. Recognizing that different communities within San Diego have different needs and different priorities for library service. The branch libraries should embrace that and tailor services and spaces to meet those local needs and opportunities and priorities. In other words, there's no one size fits all library that's right for all of San Diego. That said, there is an interest, we heard over and over again, an interest in programs and events and gatherings in the library. So every library in San Diego should have the ability to host programs and events. The framework proposes a new metric for branch library space that will provide more room for the community for programming, for technology, for collections, for current and future populations. That metric also can be used with a proposed methodology for planning library space that will ensure equity throughout San Diego in access to library space and services. The framework proposes a minimum size for new and expanded library branches. Bigger is better. It's proved that in the past, and that will continue to be the case in the future. The last master plan, the 2002 master plan, also, its strategy was to look for opportunities to replace the smaller, older, tinier branches with newer, bigger, better ones. And that strategy was successful and should continue in the future.
Now, support for the plan is crucial. More funding is needed to operate expanded facilities and services, and that need for more funding will likely scale as population grows. Now, the city has been proactive about involving the community in library projects, and continued city support is encouraged through the next master plan.
So, like we said, quick presentation, quick set of highlights. If you want to find out more, we encourage you to look at the draft document, which is available at the link here on the screen. That's also where you can find out where to provide your comments on the draft and your thoughts about libraries in San Diego generally. You can find out information about how to participate in the Q&A sessions, which are scheduled for August 24th, which is a Tuesday, and Saturday, September 18th. Carson and I will both be there to hear questions and have that discussion. There's going to be an information update at the Public Safety and Livable Neighborhoods Committee meeting in September, which is a public meeting. So if you're interested, feel free to join us there as well. And thank you so much for sharing a few minutes with us today. And we look forward to hearing your thoughts on the draft plan.
Thank you so much. Hope to see you soon.
Fantastic. Thank you. Jill and Carson, thank you. Really, I want to let you know how grateful we all are for the work that you and your organization has put in, working with Misty and her team and the foundation and the community for the last 18 months during this challenging time, for sure. But we were, like you said, able to get some very robust community input last spring during the community input phase. And certainly appreciate the work in the presentation and the document that's up on the website now. I believe the question Q&A tab is available to start putting some questions in, but I do want to get us started with a couple of things. There are some questions that came in earlier and also revolve around some of the conversations that we've had as this is getting finished up. The plan reads like, and this is actually a quote from someone who's provided a little bit of feedback already, but I think it sums it up pretty nicely. The plan reads like a diagnosis of symptoms versus a plan of treatment. I know that Misty, you talked a little bit about how important that was to get an understanding of where the foundation is at, the foundation of the library is at now before you start building a set of priorities. But perhaps the three of you can talk a little bit more about that as this is an important step in the plan development.
I'll kick that one off. I loved this metaphor when I saw it. I thought it was a really good way for us to talk about what this framework is and what that next phase that Misty talked about was. The diagnosis and explanation of symptoms. You go to the doctor and they say you're not active enough. You really need to get some more exercise. You need to be thinking about exercising 5 times a day, get your heart rate up, that sort of thing. And that's about as far as this framework goes. The next step will be that sort of putting together a real plan of an exercise plan for yourself. What you're going to do on Monday, you're going to do 50 burpees and 20 jumping jacks. And then on Tuesday, you're going to take an extra special long walk with the dog. You're going to rollerblade on Wednesday. If people still do that in the 21st century, I don't know. But, so that's really that next stage. We held back from that next stage in this plan framework for a couple of reasons. One was this was a big analysis and set of recommendations in itself. And the next, another one is that having a little bit more time to look at those specific opportunities later, to think about the feasibility of that, to start defining specific projects, and to make sure that those things are consistent with the California Environmental Quality Act. All of that, we want to make sure there's enough time and space for that later, as well as that community input. But that said, all of you, I'm sure, have some things in mind that you'd love to see at your library or in your community. So please don't hold back on sharing those in this comment period. Those specifics may not show up in the plan document this time, but they're absolutely going to be part of that next stage.
Before we move off of this really quickly, so what is the timeline for that next phase? I know this has come up a few times as well as come up just this evening. Are there some specific steps that we're following right now to finish phase 1 to prepare us for phase 2? And then is there sort of what are the specifics about getting phase 2 going and the timeline that would be anticipated?
That's a great question. I think, Misty, you're probably the one to take this about how we finish up this framework.
Yeah, so really it's going to depend on the feedback that we get and how that, kind of shapes this, the final document of phase 1. So we are going to take this to Public Safety and Livable Neighborhoods, like we said, in September, and then incorporate all of the feedback that we're receiving, both in these live sessions and through the website. You can provide your feedback on the website and really incorporating that. And then it's going to go to our Board of Library Commissioners, and they're going to make a recommendation to the city to adopt this as a plan. And then that's going to enable us to move forward with the second phase, which will allow us to dig a little bit deeper, get into maybe some specific looking at the branches really in depth and making, some more recommendations, but still remaining flexible enough for us to be able to not be kind of pigeonholed into, specific, which is the problem with the current master plan that we've been working off of, has some very kind of strict guidelines, and libraries have changed. And so those guidelines aren't applicable anymore. So we want to have flexibility that this document can also, morph and change as libraries do. But I think, we'll get a better sense probably towards the end of the calendar year as to what the next phase is going to look like.
Good. There are a couple of questions about some of those specifics, and I want to get to those a little bit later. But getting back to the phase 1 document that's there now, a unique concept was employed in looking at the city of San Diego through the concept of zones. You divided up the city north to south, ocean to desert, in a series of zones that are, I think for many of us, it was an intriguing way of doing that. Could you explain the process behind that, why you did that, and what you expect to learn specifically from using that kind of a process to dig deeper into our system?
Yeah, absolutely. The 2002 plan, the master plan that's still active, it used zones as well. What it did was it adopted city council districts as those zones, and it made recommendations for each zone. There was some capacity expansion. There was going to be a flagship library of a certain size in each council district, which was fine. Having zones is a very standard way of looking at library facilities and planning library facilities. The thing about council district boundaries is those change every 10 years. They changed in 2010, and they're probably going to change again after the new census results are released, which I think is next month, is what I heard. So, there was a logic to it then, but what we did was we thought, let's look at a different way of thinking about the zones. Let's see if we can find a way to look at how people are really using libraries. And so that's where we took the snapshot data, we looked at it, we saw places where people were moving back and forth using different libraries within each zone and started there. These are not set in stone. They are not meant to suggest that, people living in one zone don't use libraries outside of another zone. They're not meant to suggest that everyone in a zone uses every other library in a zone. It's just one way of thinking about this and putting some geographic tools in place so that when we say the library needs more space, San Diego needs more library space, the temptation to just put all those on the outskirts where land is cheaper and more available doesn't, become the strategy that's most tempting.
Thank you. I know that that was it was a fascinating exercise, I think, for many of us that have been working with you on this process, to take a look at the city through a different geographic perspective, a different geographic lens, and understand early on, as you were beginning to present this to many of us, the migratory pattern that we all use in using city services, right? We don't always use the park that's right behind our house for one reason or another, or the library branch that's right next to us, or a variety of other city services. So I thought it was a very interesting and unique way to begin taking a look at not only how we all, but I personally, use city services. We can't get away from any conversation about libraries and library usage without a conversation about COVID. In the last 18 months, I don't need to be reminding everyone of where we were, but a conversation or a question came up early on, dealing specifically with COVID, and the question was, what was learned from COVID? What improvements should be permanent, and how should we prepare to enact those permanent improvements and permanent solutions, and perhaps with regards to looking forward, hopefully we don't have to do this again, but understanding that we need to put precautions in place.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Carson, please.
This could take up the rest of our conversation.
All the time, every day. I know you're answering that question. I think probably the biggest impact to the study is that we had to rethink past data. We always see when we're looking at data, it's like previous results do not guarantee future performance. That is no more certain than it is right now. So, San Diego Public Library, as libraries are all over the country, are reinventing their path forward. There are a couple things, though, that have shown through. Some of these things are mentioned in the report somewhat lightly because of the focus of the master plan. But we are definitely entering into a mixed mode future, meaning that sometimes people would think of libraries, as Misty was saying early on, as just this warehouse of books, which is an outdated notion, because it is books and digital resources and online resources and lots of things in between. And so thinking about having a physical presence is still very important, because we're all just clamoring to get back together. It was nice for a couple of months before this recent COVID spike, because that came to home to roost. We also all know that digital is a certainty going forward. It's an option. Some people did not think of it as an option before, and now, of course, it is. Sometimes it's the go-to. So equipping San Diego Public Library, equipping itself to be able to be strong on both fronts, including the physical front and the digital front, is paramount. And so that goes into some of the recommendations that were done in the short term. There are some technology recommendations towards the end of the report that go into some detail about shoring up some of the infrastructure things. I know it's really boring stuff, but it's that those are the things that help make those digital services have a place to live and to be robust. But I think that this mixed mode future, and library staff also working in a mixed mode future, being equally comfortable using digital tools to do their work and their outreach and their contact with patrons as they are with in-person, are important.
Do you see, Carson, in the work that you do, not only in supporting, the development of the San Diego Public Library Master Plan, but in the work that you do around the country, do you see, for example, that the digital infrastructure needs are going to be similar in scale and scope to the physical needs that libraries currently have?
Yes, in terms of effectiveness, yes. And one key difference, that's such a great question, because physical things are really expensive and they're really hard to scale up. By comparison, because technology is relatively new in libraries, we think of our investments in technology as super expensive. I think as we go forward, we're going to see technology investments to be more of a bargain in comparison to just the rigors of physical things. Now, there's expenses that go along with technology, which is the replacement schedule, which a lot of people forget about. Every time we have things that deliver technology, those things wear out, they only last a certain amount of time. So there will be more ongoing costs involved, but I think that it will be interesting to see and hopefully see an attitude shift in libraries everywhere towards technological investments, because those have been lacking.
Yeah. Quick question on the current state of libraries and library development. Misty, I guess this might be more appropriate for you. Not all future changes in the public libraries will be guided by the new master plan. We know that. Some are already in process. I think Jill talked a little bit about San Carlos, Ocean Beach, Oak Park. There's other Pacific Highlands Ranch. There are modifications, expansions, conversations around different branches. For which of the existing libraries is there already a commitment to replace, expand, or extensively modify, if at all, right now?
So specific commitment is always a tricky question, because it always has to do with funding. But right now, what is in work, so we have a library, Pacific Highlands Ranch is a new library, so that will be the 37th library for the system that is being built in the north part of the county. We also have Ocean Beach, which is being expanded, so that is in the design phase. We still have a funding gap to close on that one for it to move into construction. We are also really working very diligently on San Carlos and trying to move the San Carlos library forward. And so there has been money that has been put into revising the design of that. And we're waiting to hear on what the funding looks like for potentially getting that project underway. And then Oak Park is also in design phase. So we did a feasibility study for the Oak Park. We have a piece of property there that it could be built there. And so now we're moving into a design phase for the Oak Park Library. And there's also a potential feasibility study for the South University Community Library. So there was some funding put into the budget for that as well. So those are the ones that are really kind of the front of mind. And then we're trying to take care of as much deferred maintenance as we can on libraries, which is also something that this plan, in the future we'll look at, is the backlog of maintenance that we have for many of our libraries. So, things like new roofs and new air conditioning and all of those fun little things that are that are big ticket items,
Mhm.
but need to be taken care of. So.
A funny question just came up. It looks as though some of the recommendations specifically deal with bigger is better. We are a growing city, we're a growing region, and consequently need more space to do what we do. The question is, does bigger and better also include bigger and better parking? And then we can probably move off of the current state of our library system. Does it include bigger, better parking? It's a good question.
As Jill will probably give the best answer to that question, but from our survey results, I have to tell you, it was so funny to see, one of the top keywords that came in with what do you love about San Diego? And it was like everything, that was one of the top keywords, followed by, except this transportation thing is very difficult, whether I'm walking, riding a skateboard, driving a car, or needing especially to park someplace or to use public transportation. So it was very interesting to see what a difficult thing that is, and what a great question. So Jill, I think this one's yours.
Every library should have the right amount of parking, for sure.
Well,
but that's one of those things that's gonna, what the requirements are today for the city regarding parking, what the ordinances are. That's one of those things we'll need to evaluate in the future, because some sites may be better served by public transportation than other ones. And so it's all going to be part of that, evaluating the feasibility of specific options. But yes, enough parking is for sure a great idea.
We talk about the amenities that a library provides a community, digitally, literally. We just talked about parking. We've talked about space. Are you starting to see with our system, kind of what other aspects of a community library besides meeting areas and sort of special programs? What other kind of special amenities are you seeing that pull people together and bring people around the library as a real true community space, maybe even outside of the physical aspect?
I think it's the staff. One thing that came through very strongly in our surveys of both on the staff side and the patron side were how staff felt about the community that they serve, and just this really deep and abiding respect and commitment to service, and the feeling from people's quotes about how they feel when they go to the library and how they're done. So I think of all the, for master plan things, we deal with bricks and mortar and like absolutes and physical things. That je ne sais quoi of quality of service is really the origin, I think, for sparking the need to want to gather more, to want to come together for technology, because you know that you're going to be supported if you have questions, for instance, on how to use this for digital inclusion. Just supporting human needs within spaces, just simple respect coming through either a physical door or a virtual door. I think those are the origins for those.
And I think supporting staff with good library design so that they are able to spend as much time as possible with the public, rather than stuck in the back room or behind a desk, or even helping people find things that should be hopefully intuitive for people to find on their own, right? We want to make sure that people are getting the most contact with staff that they can and the highest value that they can.
I could not agree more. Staff, we always say that the biggest asset of the library goes home in the evening, and that is the staff. So,
well, the staff at the San Diego Public Library is among the best, I personally think. Couple of conversations that we've had along the way that came up during the focus groups, came up during the community engagement phase last spring, a couple of times just in conversation around this presentation here, center around equity. And I know that equity is a key priority and a key component of the system of the future. But there's a challenge there. And the challenge really centers around the alignment of resources. Can you all address that and how this phase, the conversation around this phase, and using that as a look forward to phase 2 is the opportunity to address that challenge?
Carson, I think you were going to take this one first.
Oh, okay. Well, it's just because to set you up for the answer, we split up, of course, different parts of writing the report. But Jill had written something in the report that really spoke to me as I was reading through because it rang true. This is talking about when trying to rank a library, looking at different metrics, it's always very difficult because a great library is hyperlocal. It reflects its community and it focuses its services on what the community needs are, usually with what's coming through the door, the people coming through the door, the needs that are coming through the door in terms of doing that. And so when you put that out in like a cold, harsh ranking system, library against library, sometimes it looks like a library isn't doing so good because it doesn't have as much meetings there. Maybe they don't have meeting space though. That's the problem. And so Jill, I thought that you put that together in alignment very well in the way you described that.
Right. You know, we heard from staff, we heard from the community that not all branches are resourced the same. Some have newer technology than others. Some have bigger collections than others. Some, like Carson said, have more space than others. And those are all, you know, part of making sure not every community needs all of those things in equal measure, but having those things aligned with what each community needs is the part of equity that we want to make sure really it comes through in this plan and that the framework really supports.
And I think that's what makes the zone approach, again, interesting to look at in terms of a way of measuring equity, because we know, for instance, some of the branches that need technology the most have the least amount of space for it, right? And that just needs to be addressed. The demand is clearly there. Staff clearly want to meet that demand, and right now we're limited by just the physicalness of the buildings. Sometimes it's the condition of the buildings to be able to serve that. Other times it's just there's just not room to do everything that's needed.
Someone asked noted on page 9 of the new master plan, it says that 8 of the LBP recommended projects were not implemented. Which 8 projects were not, since we're talking about equity and sort of, you know, the alignment of resources and equitable distribution of library resources and funding, how were they chosen? Will they be implemented in the new plan, and will they receive priority?
So I can speak to which ones have not been completed from the original master plan. And so I just want to point out too that there were 22 projects that were put forward of 36 libraries. So there were libraries that were completely left off of the list, like Oak Park, the Claremont libraries. So there were some that were not addressed at all. But the ones that did not get completed are Balboa, Carmel Mountain Ranch, called for an expansion, the North Park Branch Library, Ocean Beach, which is looking like it's underway. There's a Otay Mesa East Branch Library that was in this plan. That was a brand new library. Paradise Hills, San Carlos, and South University Community. So those were the ones that were not completed, and I'll just have to say it's always funding. That is what moves projects forward. That is kind of it's funding, and it is community will. Sometimes it really is about how much the community is involved in the process, and then is there a funding source to move the project forward.
Speaking of funding, so there's a couple of questions that have come up about funding. One question says that she appreciates that you pointed out that more funding from the city will be needed and on an ongoing basis to fix the current problems and provide enhancements. Also like that you recommended an improved system for transferring materials between branches and getting them back on shelves more quickly. Can you talk a little bit more about that system itself in particular?
Yes. There's a metric called time to shelf, and it's a really simple, awesome metric. It's like when I return a library material, how long does it take for it to become available to another library user? Naturally, we want things to be as quick as possible, right? We want to be as efficient as we can to get that in other people's hands. We also have a large city with a big physical area to go, because something returned to the north, it might be requested in the south part of the library system, or any permutation. Right now, that the system of delivery can take up to a week or longer for a return book to get where it's going, or where it needs to go. And most of the libraries that I work with, the metric that everyone aims for is always 24 hours. We always say 24 to 48 to be charitable for times, like weekends or things when times are closed. But really what we want to shoot for is a day to 2 days turnaround time max. And right now the performance at San Diego Public Library is a week or sometimes longer. The courier system is provided by the city, and they've got a tough job to do, because they're not just bringing around library materials, they're also doing things for other city departments, for police and fire, and they're trying to do a lot of logistics delivery within the city. And as an outsider, I appreciate the tremendous load that they're under. As a library technology consultant, I know that the performance of each library is being judged by how quickly they can get materials. That's one of the ways that they're being judged by users. And so we would certainly like to see that that improved to 24 to 48 hours instead of a week, just to serve people better.
Funding is certainly going to be an issue with anything that happens going forward. Is the phase 2 plan going to do one or both of these things? One, is it going to address some funding specifics, as in how some of these projects and how some of the enhancements and service level standard improvements are going to be funded, and with ideas that are adoptable by the city? And two, are there ideas that are floating around, as one gentleman said, could you make the e-library, for example, accessible internationally, available for a fee, and make money for the San Diego Public Library in the process? So in other words, are there fee-for-service opportunities to raise money for public libraries as we look going forward? Maybe the second one first, and then we can talk about larger.
That's
The
Misty.
short answer is no, because the library in essence is free, right? Free and open to the public. So it's a free service, and that was, so we're going to bound by that. Also, our ebook vendors we have licenses that, keep it to within a very specific geographic area. So it's, we're also kind of bound by that as well. And a lot of those don't translate internationally. So a lot of the platforms don't translate internationally. So we are unique here at the Central Library. We do have a few revenue sources. So we have parking. We also have a special event space that we rent out, that we to offset, but it really, our special event revenue, and it really offsets the increased cost of operating the Central Library from when we moved from the old Central Library. So boy, I wish that we were a money-making venture, but we're not. So.
Well, then how do we look at funding models then going forward? Because we're not talking about a small amount of money, and we're talking about, a city that is growing and whose needs are growing. How do we look at innovative, unique funding models going forward?
Phase 2, to be responsible, we'll definitely look at different ways of funding facilities. As you said, just the maintenance alone is a big ticket item, and even that would take some study to figure out how we're going to pay for that. I think there's an opportunity to look at partnerships and joint facility development. The parks have a new master plan in the works, and there's a lot of nice synergies between libraries and recreation facilities. There's a lot of opportunities to share spaces and complement each other in a way that gives the public even more value for its investment in both of those services. There are all kinds of strategies that libraries in other communities have been using. Multnomah County Library in Portland, it has, and I think Kansas City as well, have provided air rights over their branch, or the ability to develop on city-owned property. So there's, housing above or something above, and the library gets a nice ground level, larger branch. So those kinds of creative strategies are things that, will definitely be looked at in a phase 2.
And I can say that that's something that the mayor is very interested in and has talked about several times is, we have a great need for housing in San Diego, and can we combine that with, building libraries, on the ground floor and housing above the library. So there's a lot of thought being, put into creative solutions.
We have time for a couple more questions that I've got a few to pull from here, but sticking right there for a minute, we know that there will have to be an investment in technologies, staffing, training, our virtual library infrastructure. So you had just talked about pulling some ideas from other libraries. We can certainly take a look at how other libraries are employing some best practices. And I guess what we're really talking about is how municipalities and regions are investing heavily into these systems. You mentioned Portland. Are there some other systems that, just out of the curiosity in all of us, we might be able to take a look at, and what does it look like for them to do this in San Antonio, Cincinnati, Portland, San Francisco? I'm making up cities, I don't know. Is there any way that you can point us towards?
And I think that's what makes the assessment so powerful, is to help do comparisons between San Diego and others, because the kind of the devil in the details is, in terms of trying to find an actual true peer to San Diego Public Library. And we're talking about partnerships and technology. Part of your technology at the library is done in partnership with the city. There's a very small sliver of your connectivity partnership being done with the State Library and the Scenic Network, as far as some of the connectivity. There's some mixed modes of sharing responsibility, for instance, for website updates, right? From the city and from the library. Every place is mixed up a little bit differently. I shouldn't say mixed up. They have a mix that's a little bit different to provide those services that look the same on the outside, but they're actually very different the way that they're constructed. So that's helpful in looking at peers for inspiration. But that aside, one that I think is an excellent peer that hardly anyone talks about anywhere is the Miami-Dade Libraries. They have this very interesting core group of, they're actually county employees, but they're completely dedicated to library technology. I believe it's 12 to 15 different staff members with extremely high levels of just knowledge and expertise in commodity IT, like Microsoft's projects, their cloud infrastructure and things like that. They've been written up in different articles that we never hear in library land, but you see them, for instance, being written up by Cisco, for instance, because of some of the innovative approaches that they've done. So I think, but again, the way that they're configured are completely different. But in terms of inspiration, the idea of having a shop where you can build things and not just have to buy them or hope you can get lucky that the right people are already there with the right expertise. That's one that I would point to for inspiration.
A couple quick ones that you might know off the top of your head. The report says some of San Diego Public Library's smaller branches lack any dedicated meeting space at all. How many fall into that category? We have 36 branches.
Boy.
A third?
Off the top of my head, I would say only about a third probably have a substantial meeting room size. Now, there's some that have kind of smaller, smaller meeting rooms, but nothing that is, but definitely not big enough for that community.
We've mentioned we use the word stakeholders quite a bit in these conversations. From the three of your perspectives, Misty as the director and Carson and Jill as people who've worked in this industry and work with other library systems, who are stakeholders to you?
For me, so I'll answer that. So for me, stakeholders, there's a number of different stakeholders for libraries. So of course, it's the public. That's the most important stakeholder. There is also Friends of the Library, which are the public as well. There is the foundation, there's the commission, there is our elected officials, there's our staff. They are absolute stakeholders in this. So, and there's the people who are not our patrons. You know, that's one of the things that's really, I think, intriguing about this process is what is the viewpoint and perception of libraries from those who don't use the library. That's really, that's another very important thing that we need to know, and we need to capture that data.
I think moving into phase 2 in particular, stakeholders will include potential partners like the school district and Parks and Recreation, other city departments, other community organizations and agencies that have the ability to align with what the library is doing, and for sort of mutual aid and mutual benefit, mutual increased impact for the community. That's a group that we'll definitely want to tap into at that point even more.
And I think even having a better understanding of our, in terms of staff as stakeholders is very, very important, but having a better understanding of patrons as stakeholders, because we have different, like the library is organized with services and collections around folks who we know are using our collections, but having a more detailed look at who they are, what they need, especially on the digital front, by studying data that we can see, and maybe looking at other data sources as well to overlay that tells us more about the community to access. That's an underutilized function in libraries. We just don't see enough of that, but I think that we have an expectation from library patrons that we understand them a little bit better. What they don't understand is that by culture and sometimes by law, we haven't collected information on them. We haven't collected data on them. So it's a very fine line to walk, and it's also a policy decision by the library before endeavoring on that. But there are some library systems that are actually taking a much closer look to understand the customer, right? And one of our recommendations in the report is to do customer journey mapping, and that was just kind of it was kind of an outlier for a master plan. But the idea is that we start taking a closer look and start defining the folks who are using our facilities, using our digital resources, using our meeting rooms, and understanding them better so that we can serve them better.
So speaking of understanding and serving customers better, in the plan, it mentions that during the COVID shutdown, library Wi-Fi systems were left on so that people could access them and could access internet from outside of the buildings. How was this communicated to the community when we're talking about understanding the way that customers using the services at the library? A question comes up that says, how do we communicate that, and how are we communicating with our customers?
So that's a number. So I guess that's for me. So that's a number. Where are my communication people? There's a number of different ways that we communicate. So we do social media. We do try to do a number of different press releases. Try to get things in community newspapers or community websites or blogs. We try to talk to different community organizations. We post things. I mean, we have huge banners now that we're putting outside of all of our libraries to advertise our Wi-Fi hotspots. We are also going to be doing an insert in water bills, so watch for that coming along. So we're always trying to look for different creative ways to get our message out, keeping in mind that we don't have a marketing budget. So, much of what we have to do, we do on our own, really trying to use as many free or low cost resources as possible. So sometimes it's really difficult
Mhm.
to make sure. If I had, if I had a nickel for every time somebody said, I didn't know you did that, we wouldn't have budget problems. We could build all the libraries. So it's something that we're constantly working on is
Yeah.
messaging.
Two quick questions came up regarding sort of the state of where we are now and maybe looking forward. In 2002, the city adopted an ordinance that 6% of San Diego's general fund would be earmarked annually for San Diego Public Library operations. We still lag behind most California libraries. We know that. What can be done to get the city council to follow this ordinance? And then conversely, another question talked about how committed do you believe that the city is to building each library up to 20,000 square feet? So two questions that bring some past design, past conversations into the present that may affect or influence the future. The city ordinance and the 20,000 foot branch idea.
So the city ordinance, it really is about advocacy. That's the number one thing that, and when we talk about what the public can do for us or what people can do to get the message, make sure the library's funding is stable, it's advocacy. That's the number one thing. Make sure that, elected officials, city council, the mayor's office understand how important the library is to your community and to you individually, and protecting that budget. How committed do I think the city is going to be? So it's still, and that's something I think that when we get into phase 2, we really need to look at, because when you talk about each library being 20,000 square feet, do you need each library, even ones that are 3 miles from each other, to all be 20,000 square feet? Or do you say, instead of 3, libraries, do we build one big, huge 50,000 square foot library that serves a bigger population or a bigger, area? So those are things that we need to explore, because what's the feasibility of making something happen? What is going to get us to the end goal? And 20,000 square foot libraries is not going to be it, right? So that's going to be a commitment that I don't think any city would be able to fund. So we're going to have to really look at, what does that mean? What does a bigger library mean for communities? And it may mean, less libraries, but bigger, more current, updated, flexible libraries that really serve a bigger community, but serve that community very, very well.
Sure. And looking forward, I think particularly what we've learned from the last 18 months, 16 to 18 months, the E side of the library has no geographical boundaries. It has no physical boundaries, and that is certainly, quite a few of the comments that came up. Carson, Jill, Misty, you both know this and have heard quite a bit of feedback throughout this entire process there is a hunger, I think, to invest much more heavily into the digital, virtual E, whatever we want to call it, the E side of our library system, as not only resources for people to access, but the ease of which people use libraries and use, library resources and services, that kind of thing. And so I know that there are questions and there are considerable comments that we will see and that I've seen pop up a little bit so far this evening that deal specifically with technology. And so it will be exciting to dive into some of those specifics, things that, people have brought up, things like ebooks, the virtual side, kiosks, and, all those kind of things. And so it'll be interesting to see, how the rest of these, the comment period and the conversations over the course of the next several months shape up to serve to support that. But we should probably get ready to wrap up. Before I have one more question, I do want to take a quick minute and thank Malvina, Mark, Ernie, Katie, Kamal, Katie again, Laura, Eric, Mitchell, and then my colleagues, Charlie and Jerry, for being able to pull some questions out of the chat and for contributing to what I believe was a very thoughtful and thorough conversation. Final question before I turn it over to you, Misty, to take us out. What can people do to help support the rest of the development of the phase one, to get it adopted? What do patrons and library supporters need to do to get this over the finish line?
First of all, would love it. Everyone who has the time and the willingness to read the draft plan and make sure it speaks truth about San Diego and about the library and about the vision for the future. We really want to hear all of that. We're going to read all of that feedback, and you know, there will be a final document that will incorporate your good input. I wanted to echo what Misty said about advocacy too, and just the importance of you know, letting your city leadership know that libraries are important. I think, you know, she said if she had a nickel for every time people said, I didn't know the library does that. City leadership is often that way too. They don't know. And so, you know, why does the library need more money? They're just going to buy more books with it, when it's really about all of these wonderful things that the library does for the community, building equity, building access to new opportunities. It's about quality of life. And so keeping that communication and advocacy going. Carson,
That's right.
any other?
That's just, you know, and I hope it's really clear that we do want this feedback. We have like 8 channels going on in the background with different chat windows. The feedback that we received, it was so important. Like when we had, you know, the 7,500 responses, like open-ended responses to the community survey, we actually invented new ways to harvest that information so that it would be valuable to see trends. So it wasn't, we could see what comments added up to. So your comments are very, very important. In a master plan, it can be a little, there's so much to put in that we also have to make decisions of things that we actually don't include. And so I've seen some comments about spaces, about technology, about services, using technology, for instance, like infrastructure, asking for a little bit more there. And so those are well-placed comments, and we do want to hear that, because we can certainly, frankly, there's a lot of things that we could have included in the report, but we didn't want to make it 700 pages. We needed to make it something that was actionable and concise. And so hearing what's important to you is important to us. So thank you for that.
Great. Well, before I turn it over to Misty for a final comment on behalf of the Library Foundation, the Friends of the San Diego Public Library, and the Library Commission, thank you all again for participating in this evening's presentation. Again, please do check the chat. The presentation and this recording of the presentation will also be made available. The presentation that Jill and Carson started with and at the top of the hour will be made available. And of course, the document itself, and there is ample opportunity for you to provide your feedback, and we're looking forward to hearing from everyone. Thank you. Again, we do have another presentation on September 18th at 2 p.m. The same link, I believe, will be available, but there will be some communication that goes out beforehand. And please do invite family, friends, neighbors, community groups, organizations that you're involved in that find the value in their library to be impactful and an important community resource. With that, thank you, Misty, if you want to give us a final comment.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for being, you know, invested and really, you know, participating in this process. It's really important for us to, that's what we want to do. The library is not an internal organization. We are a public organization, and so we want to be the best public organization, and we want to provide what it is that the public wants for the library system. And so that's what this is about. This is about capturing that feedback. So please take the time just to look at the document, give us your thoughts. I know there was a lot of questions that didn't get answered. We will be looking at those, you know, and incorporating that feedback into the document, and really look forward to moving this process. This is huge for San Diego. It's been a long time. When you think about the last planning document that we have is from 2002. You know, libraries, it's apples and oranges for what libraries are now from what they were then. So we're really, really excited to have a document that's going to take us into the future. And so I thank you all for being here and hope that you will continue to engage with us, that you'll participate. If you want to participate in the next listening session, if you want to come to the Public Safety and Livable Neighborhoods meeting, please, when we have the commission meeting, but please, continue to engage with us. Thanks.
Thank you. And yes, please do know that any questions that were presented in the chat or in the Q&A that we're not able to get to, we will incorporate all of those thoughts into the feedback. Fantastic. Thank you.